This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 375. Does Andreessen need a dose of techno realism?
An optimist is a person who tends to be hopeful and confident about the future and the success of something. People who are optimists tend to see the positive things more than negatives, and that often helps them to achieve what they want. Optimists are most often action takers, and even if there are some negative indicators, they will close an eye for it or plan to figure it out later.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Well, that is from a video I picked up off YouTube from the productivity guy with his definition of optimism. And that explains why Marc Andreessen's new manifesto on Techno Optimism is so sure that everything is going to work out fine. Because we'll just figure it out later. But can we wait that long? And can optimists just cast aside those who disagree as enemies of optimism, which is just going to make life worse for everyone? So we dissect the Techno Optimist Manifesto this week on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Well, Marc Andreessen is an American software engineer who also helped to write the web browser Mosaic, and then he went on to become co-founder of Netscape. He's now a partner in the Silicon Valley venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. He's worth about 1.8 billion US dollars, apparently. And he wrote a blog piece recently called the Techno Optimist Manifesto, which argues that we are a species that's been around 300,000 years, and we've found a way to adapt and develop. So why wouldn't we keep on doing that? So, yeah, an interesting blog piece. Steve's read it as well. Mm-hmm. Some of it is right, isn't it? In that we have, clearly mankind keeps on adapting. There's always that danger, though, that if you always assume that you're always going to adapt, what happens on the day that you don't?
Yeah, it was a weird thing to read because, you know, I'm clearly in my own way. I'm a techno optimist, but I want to be a techno realist as well. So, and what I found was a mixture of realism and optimism and outright bloody fantasy in some parts of it. And I thought, you know, the only way we're going to survive, in my opinion, in the very long term, is to become a technological species that can actually leave its own planet and take life with it, because as far as we've seen in the universe, there isn't, there certainly aren't many other spots that are like Earth. In fact, so the current count of places like Earth is one. And we know, if you know your technology, you know that in about something of the order of, between hundreds of millions and a billion or so years, the Earth will be absorbed by the expanding sun. So if we don't do something to get life off this planet, then there isn't going to be life, whether human or any other type.
That's quite a long-term view you're taking.
Yeah, but you have to. I mean, if we call ourselves intelligent, we don't have a 30-year time. I mean, this is almost one way you can define the finance sector as stupid. What is their time horizon? The quarterly report
next
in
week.
5 years. I'm sorry, we've got to think longer than that. So yeah, we're done.
Well, it's the next trade actually for most people, isn't it? Actually, in reality, it's it's split-second decisions. But isn't part of the problem as well? I mean, the human population has always been growing. So if you believe that, as he does, that it's all about growth, that if you don't have growth, you've got stagnation, and technology is going to help that growth. But hasn't the issue been, or the benefit been, that the population, if we're looking for growth, the population has always grown? So, you can grow in two ways. Like one, you can become more productive with a, zero population. You just increase productivity. And so, the economy grows on that basis. And we can discuss whether economic growth is a good thing or a bad thing. But if that's the end goal, that the opposite of that is stagnation, then productivity and population growth. Now, the population isn't growing, and neither is productivity anymore. So is technology really going to fix that? It's not going to fix the population issue, because obviously the wealthier people become, the less they have sex, or the more protected they are when they have it.
Yeah, this is why I say it's a mixture of things I can agree with and things I almost puked at, because and this Musk apparently has the same attitude. We can have 100 billion people on this planet. We've kind of got 8 billion. There have been periods in the past where numbers have plunged. I think we lost about something like 30% of the human population during the Black Plague. There was a previous event which goes right back into the early, a few tens of thousands of years after the evolution of humanity, where we were reduced to a relative handful of survivors on the coast, apparently on the coast of South Africa. So it hasn't been entirely smooth progress, but the incredible acceleration of population talked about in the 1800s, and that specifically reflects the Industrial Revolution and the application of technology to food. That's all fine, but if you really are intelligent, you don't think you're the only person in the room. And what I got out of this was he said absolutely no consideration of what's happening to the other life forms on the planet. And without the other life forms, we don't exist. So the lack of awareness of the web of life, I think, was a glaringly obvious thing in his argument. And if you don't have that awareness, then you're not a techno. You're a God knows what's the alternative?
Well, you're God. Well, you're supremist, aren't you? You're just thinking that it's a survival of our species against all others, which, obviously everything is dependent on everything else, so that doesn't work.
Yeah, you've got. But also,
I also wonder whether there's just a bit of American superiority sneaking through this as well.
Never.
Well, because if you are in Silicon Valley as investing in startups that are growing and making lots of money, you are going to get a slightly unbalanced picture. And if you look at productivity growth, it's still there in the United States. You look elsewhere, if you allow for inflation. In many places, productivity peaked 10 years ago. In Australia, I think it peaked around 2012. It's well down on that peak now, even if before we adjust for inflation. But for the USA, for whatever reason, if we measure productivity, it's not a great measure, but GDP per capita, it continues to rise, so it seems America is immune to this slowdown, but it's happening everywhere else.
Well, I think it's very badly measured. I mean, we certainly have more output per capita, but we also therefore have more waste per capita. And the problem that he actually derided the limits to growth part of the way through the publication, and I just found so much. Optimism shouldn't mean you think you can defy the laws of physics. Okay, you can use the laws of physics, and that's where I think we should talk a bit more to his mate Elon, even though Elon's in this summer, I think he's off with the Pharaohs in this one as well. But I know there's a T-shirt I saw Elon wearing at one stage saying there are laws of physics, everything else is negotiable. And he's talking as if sheer optimism can overcome the laws of thermodynamics, which you cannot do. And that's what I found, this crazy mixture of accurate characterizations of the human species and the human nature, but acting like something in a Walt Disney movie where you can wave your wand and all the problems disappear. And so
the law of thermodynamics, you're saying that because if you keep on growing, you're going to, however much you try and control it, you are going to continue to increase waste.
Yeah.
And that's an immutable law that can't be fixed.
And that's like the classic illustration that was given by Tom Murphy, the physicist Tom Murphy, when he sat next to a well-respected conventional economist back about 10, 15 years ago. And he pointed out that the sheer act of using energy, and there's a huge amount of discussion of energy in Andreessen's post as well, the sheer act of using energy to create work by the second law of thermodynamics necessarily generates waste. And Murphy's point was that if we continue growing at a rate which is regarded as just the bare minimum to avoid rising unemployment, which is about 2.3% growth per capita per annum, in 400 years, by the second law of thermodynamics alone, nothing to do with global warming, nothing to do with what's coming in from the sun, et cetera, simply the heat, the waste heat we generate. That waste heat would raise the average surface temperature of the planet to 100 degrees Celsius. Now, that ain't going to happen, because by the time we got to 30 degrees as an average temperature, we'd all die anyway. But that is the absolute limit. So we've got 400 years of potential growth on this planet until that growth makes life impossible on the planet. So the only way you can actually combine his techno-optimism with a potential future is to say, well, we've got to get off the planet, and we've got off the planet before we do so much damage to its biosphere that we can't build the technology that he's fantasizing about us creating.
Well, the simple way of understanding that, isn't it, is that cities are warmer than the country, because we've got a lot of energy has been created in those cities, and so the ambient temperature of those cities is way higher than it is in country areas, because we are creating.
Yeah, that's certainly a nice little analogy. I mean, if you're going to generate that for an average, then of course, way back now, before 400 years before that terminal point of the boiling temperature of water, we have risen the temperature of areas where industrial activity occurs in really concentrated ways versus, where it's not happening at all, quite substantially. So yeah, that alone is a point that we can't keep meeting like this. There has to be a point where, if you're going to be a techno-optimist, then an essential condition is to get off the planet before you reach anywhere near that point.
Right. Okay. But if the idea is that technology can solve anything, then you've got to understand what the problem is. So if we say, well, this is fantastic, we are becoming more productive, and we're using GDP per capita as an example of the measure, or just a country's GDP as a whole, and seeing how that's increasing, and saying, well, that's great because we are producing more now, we're seeing growth, and so much of our capitalist system is based on that growth. Surely within those numbers, a starting point would be to say, within those GDP numbers, we've got to include all the negative externalities. So GDP has got to include pollution levels as much as it includes, how much revenue is generated.
There's a difficulty there, because if you do too much of that, because of the second law again, you establish everything as negative. Doing any work generates more waste than you generate order out of that work. So I think to some extent you can't incorporate things, but you've got to be aware of them, and you've got to say, okay, what conditions do they impose upon us which are troubling? And a part of me kept on coming back to the thought that if you're a technology person at all, and you're thinking about time, you've got to be thinking in terms of differential equations, rates of change over time. And for a set of differential equations, one essential thing is, where are you starting from? And if your initial conditions are at a point where, if you progress from here, you are going to break the system down before you get to be able to continue growing indefinitely. So there's no awareness of the initial conditions he's got there. If he wrote this thing 50 or 60 years ago and then said, well, let's now work out our trajectory, and can we continue this path without breaking the system, then I would have, I wouldn't have been as disappointed by what I read instead as I was this time, because there are fairly good arguments from the climate science end of the world that we've pushed ourselves into such a corner that if we keep on going at the current rate of growth that we're currently experiencing, we're talking decades until we cause such climate catastrophes that there'll be no possibility for sedentary civilization. And you've got to have a sedentary civilization with factories that can perform indefinitely and be improved to be able to have the sort of techno-optimism that he's full of.
Well, his techno-optimism is entirely driven by energy, isn't it? I mean, he's acknowledged the fact that to do all of this we need loads more energy. The more energy we have, the more people we can have, the better everyone's lives will be, is basically what he's saying. We should raise everyone to the energy consumption level that we have now. So, developing countries should be using as much as the Western world. Then we increase our energy 1,000 times, he's saying. And we're going to do that because we're going to have silver bullets like nuclear fusion, for example. So that is going to be our saviour, and that is going to allow us to go into this brave new world where technology gives us untold wealth for everybody across the planet.
Yeah, which will be at a temperature of 150 degrees Celsius. This is the thing that I just say, for Christ's sake, have some perspective, mate. I mean, be optimistic by all means, but ground yourself on what are the physical laws of the universe, and then as they apply to the part of the universe we're occupying. And that level of energy increase is just ridiculous in terms of the capacity of the planet to absorb that amount of heat. And that's what I found. It was definitely a case of, to quote Phil Murawski on this point, was definitely more heat than light.
But I mean, it's interesting that at least he's acknowledging that to see this growth, we need more energy. I mean, there are people who go, no, we will decouple, we'll do more with less. At least he's saying, no, we need to do more with more.
And then that's partly why I said it's not entirely like, it's not like reading William Nordhaus, for example. At least there's a bit of realism that you need energy to do these things. But then, okay, if you use energy, you're going to have waste. How much can the environment into which you're dumping that waste cope? I'm sorry, get us into a Dyson sphere, get us into a something that takes production off planet. Then that's all quite feasible. But are we at the right timing? And one of the I'm a bit of a Musk fan when it comes to SpaceX. I want to see a colony on Mars as soon as possible.
Yeah, can Musk go there? Yeah, can he be one of the first ones?
Well, that's the thought. He says he does. He wants to die on Mars, just not on impact, and I can understand that. But I want to have a colony on there for the same reason that I wanted to have monks in the Dark Ages, because they maintained the knowledge that we lost during the Dark Ages, and we could be rebuilt again. And frankly, that's my attitude. We're going to stuff it up here, and that's attitudes like that. If that's the popular attitude of a multi-billionaire in America, then I think we are cooked.
It's a bit sad, isn't it? It's like you just imagine, and I don't think he's an overweight man with a cigar, but you sort of picture an overweight man with a cigar counting his money saying, yes, let's do more of it, let's do more. It seems like that, doesn't it? Irrespective of the damage it might cause. Yeah.
We're very Walt Disney.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, there we are, back in America as well. So, look, he's also saying that, if we accept that technology will drive us forward as it has done in the past, then we really don't need any systems to control it, because the market will control all of that, and anything which gets in the way is stopping this optimism from living itself out. So we'll look at that when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast with me and Steve Keen. Back in a moment.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
We are talking techno optimism on the podcast this week. Marc Andreessen, a software engineer in America, also, a bit of a billionaire. If you could just be a bit of a billionaire. Actually, he's almost a two-billionaire. He's written this blog piece about how we need techno optimism, because that is what will deliver our way forward and make everyone very wealthy and, with plentiful supplies of everything we need, because we are greedy people and we want more. Actually, even just as a foundation piece there, Steve, I don't know whether it's a factor of age or not being American, I actually don't want more. I don't feel as though I need too much. I get to birthdays and people say, what do you want for your birthday? And I go, I can't think of anything, really. Don't. I've got everything I need. Buy me a new jumper, perhaps. This idea that we are always striving for more, that might have been the case at a time when things were less plentiful. But has it run its course in the West, I wonder?
Potentially, but I think at the same time, if you got the sort of wealth he's talking about, then you want to buy a yacht, you go buy a yacht. It's so that the fact that you don't have constraints is partly where that sense of insatiability comes from, and that's why you see this looted.
A lot of effort having a yacht. There, you've got to have someone. You've got to get a crew. You've got to make sure that you're getting all the barnacles off it. Seems like a lot of work, Steve.
Well, there's a classic old joke about that. You might hear about an economist finding himself in a Greek island and sitting down at a tavern and next to a fisherman who's sitting there drinking some Retsina. And he says, oh, why are you here? He says, I've just finished work. He said, but if you work longer, you could have more than one boat. What would I do with more than one boat? Well, you hire people to do the work for you. And what would you do if you hired to do the work for you? He said, well, you could relax more easily. He said, well, I'm doing that now.
Exactly.
So so long as you cover fundamental needs, and you don't have a sense of hunger driving you to want more. And so you and I are in the sort of moderately comfortable balance in the middle. We've got a comfortable enough lifestyle. We're not starving, but we're not capable of imagining some of the extra consumption that somebody like Andreessen takes as second nature. So there is a sort of a smooth spot which the middle class in the West is capable of enjoying these days.
And what is it that drives life? Actually, it's not abundance, is it? It's relationships. Actually, last weekend, I caught up with a bunch of mates I went to college with 38 years ago. Some of them I hadn't seen for 38 years. We had a couple of beers, maybe 4. I don't think, maybe 6 actually in total. Anyway, he's counting. I am, obviously. And then we went for an Indian meal. We had a fantastic time. Better than sitting on a yacht somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean, to be quite honest with you. So it does all get down to relationships at the end of the day. And I think he might have missed that point as well, perhaps because he hasn't got very meaningful relationships. I'm sure he has, but didn't seem to see it as part of his theory. But he says, in terms of getting back to the main point, invention, there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology. We had a problem of starvation, so we invented the Green Revolution. We had a problem of darkness, so we invented electric lighting. We had a problem of cold, so we invented indoor heating. We had a problem with heat, so we invented air conditioning. We had a problem of isolation, so we invented the internet. We had a problem of pandemics, so we invented vaccines. And then he says we had a problem of poverty, so we invent technology to create abundance. Now, he's very much against any system interfering, any governments, it should all be free market. But this issue of abundance and poverty hasn't been fixed by technology, has it? I mean, there's still a lot of very poor people in the world, even though there might be a lot of abundance, but we've not been very good at distribution. Technology hasn't fixed that aspect of it.
No, and that's well and truly the case, and that's where you think, hello, what planet are you on? So we all rely upon, you're talking about relying upon the internet for communications, and there are people who are buying, digging the cobalt out of mines in the Congo where I don't think they regard themselves as enjoying abundance. So the distribution is one of these things that market optimists wave their hands about it and say, well, let's solve it by more growth. But, you've got a long way to go when there are 3 billion people who still remain in fairly obvious poverty and are driven to want more because they certainly aren't getting enough now. So that's what, when Kate Raworth talks about the donut, they're people whose lifestyles are in the hole of the donut. They haven't yet made it to the sustainable stage. And if we've taken a quarter of a millennium to get there, then it's pretty bloody slow, given the rate of technological progress. So to dismiss distribution is a sign again of techno fantasy, not techno optimism.
Yeah. And the role of the state in all of it. So I'm, not a big supporter of Chinese communism, but you could say, well, okay, there's 800 million people lifted out of poverty since the late 70s through sort of quasi-capitalism. But the state played a large part in that happening, and yet here he is saying it's all got to be free market.
We have this idealized vision of what the free market is. We have a fantasy of the free market versus what it's to some degree of reality of what states can be like, good and bad states, mainly bad ones. But that's why I think there's just too much fantasy here. Like looking through his other parts of the manifesto. There are a couple of obvious red flags for me. For example, the economist William Nordhaus has shown that creators of technology are only able to capture about 2% of the economic value that's created by that technology. You would reference William Nordhaus for anything, you're in deep, deep trouble. Yeah. And also, we believe in David Ricardo's concept of comparative advantage, which only works if capital is malleable. If you can use a blast furnace to make a cappuccino, that is nonsense. And we believe the market sets wages as a function of the marginal productivity of the worker. That is, technically speaking, crap. And that's been a part of my economic analysis is to show that marginal productivity theory of income distribution is nonsense. This is what comes out of the belief in neoclassical economics, it comes out and says capitalism is a meritocracy. You get paid what you're worth. And we were speaking with Nick Hanau, just last week, and Nick is the opposite, saying, he realizes he's made his wealth partly out of his own skills, but partly also out of luck and timing. And in no way that he regards he said he's getting far more than his marginal product. I'm pretty certain Andreessen is as well. The whole idea that workers get paid what their marginal contribution is a fantasy coming out of neoclassical economics. So,
but I mean, back to that Nordhaus point. I mean, there is a point there, and I know how much you hate the guy. And he's done some crazy maths in terms of climate, but this idea of of social surplus. So if you create,
that's fair.
You only get a slice. So the internet has created massive return. Well, actually, obviously, it started from the public sector, but. I mean, he did work. The guy Andreessen himself did work in creating web browsers. The money he's made from that, and obviously, his early Mosaic browser really set the standard that everyone else has followed from. He's only seen a slice of the benefit that has created to society,
and that's quite true. I'm just saying, if you're going to reference anybody about this, for Christ's sake, don't reference Nordhaus. The guy makes up his own numbers. Yeah. So this is why there's a lack of. There's an optimism without critical foundations. There are some parts where he's quite valid, but a lot of this stuff comes out of swallowing a neoclassical textbook, and that's an extremely bad way to improve your health. Yeah.
Well, the idea that free markets will solve it all for the reasons that we've talked about in terms of the distribution effects, and yet he says, he's got a point on this as well. The markets. He says free markets are the most effective way to organise a technological economy because of good old, fashion, supply and demand. Pricing, driving innovation, rather than centralized planning, which he says is doomed to failure. The system of production and consumption is too complex. So that's why you need a hybrid, isn't it? That's why you need some sort of controls. I mean, the idea that, we know central planning doesn't work. And we know also that if you start to put big projects into government hands, then they'll probably do the wrong project and they'll probably do it badly.
Well, this is one area where, like Avner Offer's recent book, I've forgotten the title right now, but Avner made the point that we've got a stylized cartoon idea of what markets are and a stylized cartoon idea of what the government is, and we have corrupt governments. We have all sorts of hassles with market power concentration and people like Rupert Murdoch as well. But Avner's point was a very simple one. If you want to say what should be public versus what should be private, you look at the time horizon over which investment is made by each group and say, if something has a payback that occurs within the payback period expected by capitalists, that's a good thing for the private sector to control. If you're talking about something which doesn't have a payback period for 5 or 10 times the time horizon of a capitalist, that's a good thing for us to control collectively through the state doing it. And that means things like sewerage, and the UK is a classic example of that right now. You want to get sick, go for a swim in a UK river because you've privatised the sewerage systems. And the investment horizon to get returns out of maintaining sewerage systems is 10, 15, 25 years. That's too long for the manager in charge. They don't do it. The sewerage system breaks down. You get shit in your rivers. So
look on the bright side, Steve. At least it's warming up those rivers. You can go swimming in winter.
That's true. Yeah. You can even walk across them, I've heard. I'm told.
Yeah.
So this is the issue. It's just, let's bring some realism to how we talk about both the state and the markets. And what I see here is fantasy, not reality.
Well, this idea that technology will solve all of our problems. I mean, there's one problem with that, isn't there? If you believe that climate change is an issue, and you believe that this rise in temperatures needs to be controlled, and you believe that we are close to a tipping point in all of that, then why would governments need to intervene and say, okay, we need to reach net zero by 2050? Why wouldn't technology have taken us in that direction? Technology might help us get there, but technologists weren't there saying, okay, this is a problem that we can fix, because they're not focused on that, because they're focused on stuff that's going to make them money.
You necessarily have a local focus and a limited focus when you're going to be developing technology. What can I do in my local region, if you're talking farming, what can I do for what can I sell into the existing market in the country I'm in, and so on. You don't have a holistic view. And the whole idea, you imagine that you can, and also, like, if you think about what goes in competition, every firm in a market hopes to become bigger than it currently is. So what do? They invest more than is required for the service of that particular market. Now, partly that's where the creativity of capitalism comes from. You don't compete on price, you compete on the diversity of the products you're producing. So the evolutionary process that gives us change over time comes out of people trying to capture each individual in a market, trying to capture far more than they've currently got as a market share. That's an essential driver of that evolutionary development of technology over time. But it also means that you're putting more of a load on the planet than the planet can cope with. This is all okay. This sort of thinking is all okay back in the time that Baumol referred to as the cowboy capitalism, when you had the vast open plains and you could expand across them, ignoring the little troubling thing like Indians, of course. But that capacity to expand into open spaces meant you could do whatever you liked, and that was the free level of control. We're now in spaceship Earth, and if you shit too much in the spaceship, you're going to make it uninhabitable for the other occupants, including yourself. So it's a mentality coming out of cowboy capitalism,
right? But I'm sure he would say, well, actually, we may not be able to solve the problem, we may not be able to mitigate the problem. But we can create technology that will help us deal with the consequences, at least in North America. So better air conditioning systems, or better buildings that are able to withstand the floods and the, all the extreme weather events. That technology will help us cope with it rather than preventing it, which is the way we tend to go at things, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's where you start thinking, this puny little creature on the surface of the planet, thinking they can control the forces of the planet itself. When they've set those forces up to have triggered the tipping points, which are going to make this much more chaotic. What was the name of that storm that came through Mexico just recently, where it was predicted by all the models and past experience as well to remain a tropical storm, and in 12 hours it turned from a tropical storm to a Category 5 cyclone. Yeah. Now, the force levels involved in that are just beyond anything humans can hope to contain. And we've put ourselves into a planet where that's happening by using too much energy, by pushing technology too far without being respecting the boundaries, the fact that the biosphere is a very, very thin layer around a very small planet. And we if we're going to be techno optimists, we're going to get off the planet first.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. We'll stuff the planet up and then leave. That seems to be the approach, doesn't it? So we can be a small speck on another planet and go and stuff that one up. But this idea that all of this can be done without coordination, that free market is going to sort all of that out. So I'll give you an example of a question I asked a couple of weeks ago. I was hosting a panel with a bunch of people, renewable energy providers. This was in Paris, and they're all sort of pursuing their own ambitions, their own plans, which they all said is going to help us get towards, the net zero target by 2050. So there were hydrogen companies, there were biomass providers, wind companies, a company that was providing all the plug-in points for electric cars. And I asked the question which no one could answer. I said, so you're all doing this. You're all helping strive towards net zero. So what happens if you all collectively do the best you can for the profit that you can make out of it, and you help us get to 60% of the target? Who's actually there to coordinate to say that we've reached 100% of what we need to do? Because you're all doing your own bit. And the answer was, well, it's obviously for governments to coordinate that. And then the question is, well, how do they do that? Do they say, well, okay, you need to do more to reach the target? Because that's not happening. So you've got, and then they're admitting that there needs to be coordination beyond the market if we're going to reach this goal. Whereas Andreessen is saying, no, the market's going to look after all of this. You don't need the government to step in. How do you know the whole job will be done if the government doesn't step in?
How do you've got to have a capacity of looking down at the whole system rather than thinking the parts can take care of themselves. And And this is the weakness of this attitude. You need both the whole and the parts. You need a whole that provides knows what your physical limits are, and that's I'd rather have scientists working that than bloody Donald Trump, obviously. And unfortunately, our political system selects Donald Trump rather than politicians, rather than scientists. But yeah, we need to say, okay, we know what capacity the planet can take. That's what Tom Murphy's little analogy about the impact of if we continue growing at 2.3%, we're going to hit 100 degrees Celsius temperature in just 4 centuries. That sort of says, well, there's your boundaries, guys and gals, and you have to work within them. And by looking at the collective activity, we're en route to push that boundary. We have to behave collectively somehow. And the question of how we did, the democratic method certainly hasn't been effective at letting us control that. But you have to think at the level of a system rather than thinking you can leave all the individual parts to do whatever they wanted to do. The only prospect for that individuals doing whatever they want is when this occurs, we're off planet and we treat this planet as we know, the origin of life, and we have to respect life and let life continue evolving and growing, and that's what you don't see any of that in Andreessen's manifesto. It's all about humanity, and we'll take care of the animals. We are unfortunately doing quite that.
Yeah. So and we are going to speed up, accelerate this progress driven by this enthusiasm for technology doing more, and we're going to get smarter doing it. Maybe people are not going to get smarter because you've already mentioned people vote for Donald Trump, but we've got artificial intelligence coming along, which he calls our philosopher's stone. We are literally making sand think. I mean, could AI solve some of our problems? Is AI? I mean, this is probably a discussion on its own for another day. And I have to say, I'm a little bit confused about what it is going to contribute. But it clearly will speed things up. We will be able to do more thinking faster. So from that point of view, it is a benefit to society.
Yeah, I mean, my attitude to AI comes down to the question of whether you can actually have AI that's not artificial intelligence, but artificial imagination. And this is the defining difference between what we currently call AI and what is actually human intelligence. Humans can imagine things that don't exist, or can contemplate processes that don't yet happen. And so I'll think there'll be artificial intelligence when I see a computer think up something that's never existed before, or solve a dilemma if a computer could work out how to reconcile general relativity with quantum mechanics, then that'd be the point at which you say, okay, we've got artificial intelligence. At the moment, we have artificial processing power, but nothing like. There's no way that I regard anything I've seen in computing so far as having imagination.
Interesting point. That is a discussion, isn't it, for another day? So just in rounding this off, I suspect you might be one of Andreessen's enemies, because he says, that they are all for growth. Their enemy is anti-merit, anti-ambition. Well, that's not you. Anti-striving, anti-achievement, anti-greatness. I don't think that's you. Most of it's me. But the enemy is deceleration, degrowth, depopulation, the nihilistic wish so trendy amongst our elites for fewer people, less energy, and more suffering and death. Because apparently fewer people and less energy equals more suffering and death. More people, more energy, obviously means less suffering and fewer deaths.
I think it's going to cause many, many more deaths, and this is why the climate scientists I know and communicate with fairly regularly these days are terrified, because we think we're going to have an enormous number of deaths coming out of technological not blindness, but technological delusionness. And by having a deluded attitude, the capacity to continue growing at the rate we are on the planet on which we exist, we're going to see billions of deaths occur courtesy of this techno optimism. And he'll be blaming on other people who are trying to stop his mob destroying life on the planet. And this is the inability to see that that there's a biosphere that we are seriously damaging. And if we continue damaging it, we won't be able to be technological and will take out a large part of the life on the planet in the process. And this belief that the others was, it's basically saying somebody who's telling us to slow down as we're approaching a brick wall is dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it's called the Techno Optimist Manifesto. It's freely available. It's on his Substack, amongst other places. Also, his company's website has got it there as well. I think if you just search his name, Marc Andreessen, and the Techno Optimist Manifesto, you'll be able to find a copy. Have a look and see what you think. But we've got Steve's views. I think some good stuff, but a lot of rubbish is basically what you're saying.
Pretty much. And the rubbish is far more dangerous than the good stuff.
Good. We'll catch you again next week. Thanks, Steve.
Mate, bye.
I don't think Mr. Andreessen will be convinced somehow, but when you've got loads of money, you don't have to listen to anybody else. That's it for this week. I'm Phil Dobbie, back again with another edition of the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve next week. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening.
The Debunking Economics Podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.